Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I was in my junior year of high school when this happened. Our school was pretty average. Not too big, not too small. What made it special was how well everyone got along. Sure, we had our different friend groups, but there wasn't any real drama between us. I was part of the theater crowd, but I regularly hung out with the sports kids and the academic overachievers too. There was this girl in my chemistry class who had type 1 diabetes. She was really cool about it, always willing to explain her insulin pump to anyone who asked, and she never made a big deal about it. All the teachers knew about her condition, and they were usually super understanding when her pump would occasionally beep during class. That day started like any other. Our regular chemistry teacher was out sick, and we got stuck with this substitute teacher. The moment she walked in, you could tell she was one of those old-school strict types. She had this perpetual frown on her face like she'd just bitten into a lemon. The first hour went by quietly enough. We were all working on our assignments when the first beep from the insulin pump broke the silence. The substitute immediately demanded to know whose phone had gone off, reminding us that phones should be turned off during class time. Everyone just ignored her and went back to work. We all knew what the sound was, and it wasn't worth causing a scene over. But about 20 minutes later, the pump beeped again. The substitute's head snapped up so fast, I thought she'd get whiplash. She zeroed in on my classmate with a pump like a heat-seeking missile. She angrily told my classmate to turn off the supposed phone or she'd confiscate it. My classmate tried to explain that it wasn't a phone but her insulin pump that she needed for her diabetes. The substitute wasn't having any of it and demanded she hand over the phone immediately, refusing to listen to any excuses. Several students jumped to our classmate's defense, shouting out that it really was her pump and questioning how the substitute could be so dense about someone with diabetes. But instead of backing down and apologizing, the substitute doubled down. She insisted that if it was some kind of electronic device, it needed to be turned off or muted, stating that no electronics were allowed in class. The entire room erupted. Everyone was talking at once, defending our classmate. She was turning bright red, probably from both embarrassment and anger. Our classmate tried once more to explain that she couldn't turn it off because it was keeping her alive. Then the class clown jumped in, asking if the substitute was trying to kill her and pointing out that she would literally die without it. That's when things got interesting. The substitute teacher's face went through about 5 different emotions in 3 seconds: anger, confusion, realization, horror, and shame. She just stood there, mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Just then, the department head walked in. Apparently, someone had texted her about what was happening. She asked what was going on, and when our classmate explained that the substitute had tried to make her turn off her insulin pump, the department head was visibly shocked. The department head pulled the substitute teacher outside. We couldn't hear everything, but we could make out words like liability and lawsuit through the door pretty clearly. The substitute came back in looking like she'd aged 10 years in 5 minutes. She mumbled what seemed to be an apology and sat at the desk, not making eye contact with anyone for the rest of the class. The next day, we had a different substitute teacher. Word got around that the department head had put her on the do not call list for the entire school district. Apparently, this wasn't her first time causing problems, but it was definitely her last, at least in our district. Our classmate with the pump became something of a legend after that. She started wearing t-shirts with sayings like, "It's not a phone, it's keeping me alive," and "Yes, it beeps. No, I won't turn it off." She turned the whole thing into a way to educate people about type 1 diabetes, and even the class clown learned enough about diabetes management to give a presentation about it in health class. 2 weeks before the incident, I had a pretty bad accident during my morning jog. A cyclist wasn't paying attention and crashed right into me, sending us both tumbling onto the concrete. While he walked away with just a few scrapes, I ended up with a severely injured knee that required surgery. The doctor said I'd need at least 6 weeks of recovery, and I had to use crutches to move around. I work as a security consultant, which means I'm trained to handle various self-defense tools and situations. After a nasty encounter with a stalker 3 years ago, I started carrying a legal stun gun with me. Never thought I'd need it on a regular Tuesday morning bus ride though. I had a follow-up appointment with my orthopedist that day. Usually I'd drive myself, but with my knee still healing, driving wasn't an option. So there I was, sitting in the priority seating area of the bus with the driver's permission, my crutches propped against the window, when this middle-aged woman boarded. She took one look at me before marching over and demanding that I move because she required the seat. I tried to explain about my recent knee surgery, but she immediately dismissed me, saying I looked fine to her and called me selfish, insisting I give up my seat. I pointed out my crutches, but she wouldn't listen. Instead, she started ranting about how young people these days could be using props, and how in her day they respected their elders. The bus driver tried to help by pointing out all the other available seats, but she wouldn't have it. She insisted on having this specific seat, claiming it was her right because it was closest to the front. I tried reasoning with her again, explaining that I physically couldn't move due to my knee, but she just told me to shut up and accused me of making excuses. She went on about how she'd seen plenty of young people faking disabilities to get special treatment. Other passengers started getting involved at this point. One of them called out to her to leave me alone, pointing out that I was clearly injured. Another passenger even highlighted that there was an empty priority seat right across from us, but she just snapped at them to mind their own business, saying this was between her and me. She got right in my face then, jabbing her finger at me and giving me one final warning, saying I'd regret not moving. When I stood my ground and repeated that I couldn't and wouldn't move, she did something unthinkable. This supposedly respectable elder gathered up all her spite and actually spat in my face. The whole bus went silent. But what she didn't expect was my training kicking in. In one fluid motion, I pulled out my stun gun and zapped her in the shoulder. She dropped like a sack of potatoes, letting out a shriek that probably could have been heard from 3 blocks away. The bus driver immediately pulled over and called the police. While we waited, Karen lay on the floor, alternating between crying and threatening to sue everyone. When the police arrived, they didn't take long to assess the situation. Multiple passengers had recorded the incident on their phones, and over a dozen witnesses were ready to give statements. The bus's security camera had captured everything in perfect detail. The first officer couldn't believe what he was hearing when he confirmed that she had spat on an injured person just because they couldn't give up their seat. She tried to play the victim, screaming about how I had attacked her. The second officer shut that down quickly, pointing out that they had video evidence of her assaulting me first, and that spitting on someone was classified as assault. When she protested about me using a weapon on her, I explained that it was a legal self-defense tool that I was licensed to carry, and I had only used it in response to her assault. The officers checked my permit and license for the stun gun, all in order of course. They then proceeded to handcuff her, reading her rights as they escorted her off the bus. She demanded to know if they knew who she was and threatening to have their badges. Apparently, she'd been banned from 2 other bus routes in the city for aggressive behavior, but they hadn't been able to press charges before due to lack of evidence. Well, she picked the wrong person to assault this time. The district attorney's office later contacted me, asking if I'd be willing to testify against her, as they were building a case combining multiple incidents. She ended up getting community service, mandatory anger management classes, and was banned from all public transport in the city for a year. The bus company used the incident footage in their employee training programs as an example of how not to behave on public transport, though they edited out the stun gun part. I still see myself in those videos whenever I have to renew my bus pass. And I am glad knowing that somewhere out there, Karen has to walk or pay for expensive taxi rides because she couldn't be bothered to act like a decent human being. I've always encouraged my daughter to pursue her passions, and volleyball has been her dream since she was 10. She'd spend hours watching professional matches, practicing serves in our backyard, and begging me to let her join a proper team. As a single mom working 2 jobs, I had to save up for nearly a year to afford the prestigious travel volleyball league in our area. The day I handed over that $2,000 check was one of the proudest moments of my life. My daughter's eyes lit up when I told her she was finally going to play in a real team. She even started the countdown on her phone for her first practice. 3 days before her first practice, we went ice skating to celebrate her upcoming volleyball journey. That's when everything went wrong. I called out to warn my daughter about being careful near the edges. She started to reply, telling me she'd been skating since she was little, but before she could finish her sentence, it happened. She hit a rough patch of ice and went down hard. The sound of her scream still haunts me. At the emergency room, the doctor delivered the news that would crush her dreams: a dislocated knee and a torn medial patellofemoral ligament. Surgery was necessary, and recovery would take months. Through her tears, my daughter asked me to contact the volleyball league. I called the league office the next morning and spoke with the administrator. I explained about my daughter's registration and told them about her accident and need for surgery. The administrator expressed sympathy and asked what they could do to help. When I mentioned hoping for either a refund or applying the payment to next year's season, they told me they would need to check our file and requested a doctor's note confirming the injury. I sent the note within an hour. The next day, I received a call from their director. She reviewed my case and told me that their no refund policy was strict, and they couldn't make exceptions. When I pointed out that my daughter hadn't even stepped foot in the gym yet, she explained that the money had already been allocated for this year's expenses, including facilities, staff salaries, and equipment. I tried suggesting transferring the payment to next season since my daughter would be healed by then. The director shut that down, stating each season's budget was separate. Then she had the nerve to suggest I should have purchased injury insurance during registration. When I pointed out that it wasn't even offered during the registration process, she claimed it was mentioned on page 12 of their policy document. I called her out on the fact that this document was only accessible after registration was complete, which made her noticeably uncomfortable. She still insisted that rules were rules, despite understanding my disappointment. That's when I decided to fight back. I contacted the local sports association that oversees youth leagues in our area. The association launched an investigation into their registration practices. 2 weeks later, I received an unexpected call from the director. She told me that after careful consideration, they'd decided to make an exception in my case and would transfer the payment to next season. When I asked what changed their mind, she gave a vague response about revising their policies to be more transparent. Later, I learned that the association had threatened to revoke the league's certification unless they addressed their predatory registration practices. They were forced to modify their refund policy to include medical exceptions and make their injury insurance policy more prominent during registration. My daughter is now recovering from her surgery. She's doing her physical therapy exercises religiously, determined to be ready for next season. The league even invited her to help coach the younger kids while she recovers, turning what could have been a total loss into a valuable learning experience. The director still gives me cold looks when I drop by the facility for my daughter's coaching sessions, but I don't mind. It had been a rough week at the hospital where I work as a nurse in the emergency room. After pulling 3 consecutive night shifts, I finally had a day off, and all I wanted was to stock up my empty fridge and maybe treat myself to some comfort food. My local grocery store was just a 5-minute drive from my apartment, and I'd been shopping there for the past 5 years without any incident. Until today, I grabbed a cart and started making my way through the aisles, mentally checking off items from my shopping list. The store wasn't busy for a Saturday afternoon, which was exactly what I needed: some peace and quiet while shopping. When I turned into the canned goods aisle, I noticed a woman in her mid-50s wearing what looked like designer clothes and expensive jewelry. She was standing in the middle of the aisle, stomping her foot repeatedly and pointing at something on one of the shelves. At first, I thought she might have been having some sort of episode and was probably shopping with a caretaker, so I tried to carefully maneuver my cart around her. Just as I was passing by, she suddenly shouted out, asking if I was really going to ignore her. I was confused and continued grabbing the items I needed from the shelf, thinking she must be talking to someone else. But then she got louder, yelling at me and making it clear that yes, she was indeed talking to me. I looked around the empty aisle and pointed to myself, shrugging my shoulders. I was still expecting a caretaker to appear and handle the situation. That's when she demanded that I grab a can for her because it was falling over. I politely explained that I didn't work at the store, but she wouldn't listen. She fired back, insisting that just because I wasn't clocked in didn't mean I didn't work there. I had to explain to her that no, that's exactly what it meant, and I added that even if I did work there, nobody would respond to someone stomping their feet. I could practically see steam coming out of her ears. She then launched into a tirade about being the store's #1 customer, bragging about spending thousands of dollars there every month, and threatening that I would get fired for speaking to her like this. I tried one more time to explain that I didn't work there and was just trying to do my shopping, but she only got more agitated, threatening to tell her husband and ensure I'd never work in this town again. At this point, I decided it wasn't worth the hassle. I'd gotten most of what I needed anyway, so I headed to the checkout. When I was unloading my cart, I could hear her shrill voice at the customer service desk. She was loudly demanding to speak to a manager, claiming that an employee had been extremely rude to her, sworn at her, and even threatened her. She was insisting that this employee be fired immediately, declaring that she and her husband wouldn't stand for such treatment. I caught the cashier's eye and quietly explained that I was the one they were yelling about, clarifying that I didn't even work there and wishing them good luck. The cashier then cheered with a smirk that this was Mrs. Henderson, explaining that she pulled this stunt at least once a month, pretending to be their biggest customer while actually returning most of what she bought after using it. The managers apparently were quite tired of her antics. Just then, the store manager approached her and explained that they had reviewed the security footage from the canned goods aisle. He clarified that I wasn't their employee, and even if I had been, her behavior was unacceptable. He pointed out that this was her third false accusation of mistreatment this month, and told her that they would have to ban her from the store. She tried to protest, but the manager cut her off by revealing that their records showed she had returned 80% of her purchases in the last 6 months, often in used condition. He explained that, while they had been generous in tolerating this behavior, today's incident meant they had no choice but to ban her from the premises. Her face went from red to white as she realized her scheme had finally caught up with her. She stormed out of the store, followed by an equally red-faced older man who I assumed was her husband, both of them shouting vague threats about lawsuits and calling their lawyer. The manager turned to me and apologized for the incident, offering me a 20% discount on my purchase. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.